Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to share with you an incredible story about courage, justice, and redemption. A tale of how the legendary Mike Tyson faced down the ruthless Shadow Hounds in a forgotten town, standing against fear and oppression to bring hope to those who needed it most. Let's dive into this gripping and inspiring journey. In the depths of a mist shrouded forest lay a forgotten small town, its streets bathed in an eerie, pale light that barely pierced the ever present fog. This was no ordinary town. It was a place haunted by fear, where whispers of terror filled the air and shadows seemed to move with intent. The townsfolk, their faces etched with worry, lived under the oppressive reign of the Shadow Hounds, a ruthless gang whose reputation stretched far beyond the town's borders. Led by the enigmatic and menacing Blake, the gang's control was absolute. Stories swirled of people who crossed them disappearing without a trace, their fates whispered about but never confirmed. The air was heavy with dread, and few dared to resist. One chilly evening, the town's fragile quiet was broken by the rumble of a sleek black SUV rolling into the diner's gravel parking lot. The vehicle's presence was striking, its glossy surface reflecting the faint glimmers of streetlights struggling to cut through the fog. As the door creaked open, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed simply in a hoodie and jeans. It was Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion of the world. His appearance was unassuming, his gait calm, but his very presence carried a weight of unseen strength. Tyson had been traveling across the country in search of solace, hoping to leave behind the chaos of his storied past. He was just passing through, unaware of the darkness that clung to this town. Tyson stepped into the diner, the warmth inside offering a stark contrast to the chill outside. The air within was thick with tension, the patrons speaking in hushed tones, their gazes flickering nervously toward the windows. He took a seat in a corner booth, ordered a simple meal, and let his eyes wander, taking in the room's peculiar atmosphere. The staff avoided his gaze, moving quickly and quietly, as if fearing the attention of unseen watchers. Outside, the rumble of motorcycles echoed ominously as the Shadow Hounds arrived. Blake, their leader, dismounted his bike with the swagger of a predator, surveying his territory. His cold eyes immediately locked onto Tyson's SUV, a scowl forming on his lips. "Who's this?" he growled to his second-in-command, Snake, a wiry man with a sinister grin. "Doesn't look like he belongs here." Snake smirked, cracking his knuckles. "Let's make sure he knows it." The gang's arrival sent ripples of unease through the diner. Tyson, still unaware of the brewing storm, focused on his meal, oblivious to the dark shadows outside, preparing to test the resolve of a man who had faced and conquered far greater challenges. Inside the dimly lit diner, the tension was palpable. The arrival of Mike Tyson had already stirred curiosity among the nervous townsfolk, but what lay beyond the diner walls was far more sinister. The Shadow Hounds, led by the imposing and enigmatic Blake, had taken notice of Tyson's sleek black SUV parked prominently in their territory. Outside, Blake's men murmured among themselves, their voices a low growl that mirrored the menacing hum of their idling motorcycles. "Who does he think he is?" Blake sneered, his eyes narrowing. "Rolling into my town like he owns the place?" Meanwhile, inside the diner, Tyson remained unaware of the growing storm. He sat calmly in a corner booth, his large frame relaxed as he quietly enjoyed his meal. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, hesitated near his table, her gaze flickering nervously toward the windows. "You might want to eat quick," she whispered, leaning in slightly. "They don't like outsiders around here." Tyson glanced up, his piercing eyes meeting hers. "Thanks," he said simply, his tone calm but firm, as though nothing could shake his resolve. Suddenly, the glass door swung open with a loud creak, and Snake, Blake's wiry second-in-command, swaggered in. His presence immediately darkened the room, and the diner patrons fell silent, their heads bowed as if trying to become invisible. Snake's leather jacket creaked as he moved, his boots clinking against the tiled floor. He made a beeline for Tyson's booth, his movements predatory and deliberate. Hey there, champ, Snake sneered, leaning on the table with a grin that reeked of malice. Nice car you got out there. Real fancy for a place like this. Might want to move it before it gets scratched. His words hung in the air, a veiled threat that sent a chill through the diner. Tyson didn't look up immediately. Instead, he took a measured sip of his drink, his calm demeanor an unspoken challenge to Snake's arrogance. I'm just here to eat, Tyson finally replied, his voice steady and unshaken. Don't start trouble. Snake chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Trouble. Who said anything about trouble? He said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Just a friendly suggestion. The tension in the room thickened as Tyson's eyes met Snake's. There was no fear, only the quiet confidence of a man who had faced countless opponents far more formidable than this. Snake, unnerved by Tyson's unflappable demeanor, straightened up and glanced back toward the door. Guess we'll see about that, he muttered, his tone dripping with venom. Outside, the Shadow Hounds stirred restlessly, their eyes fixed on Tyson's SUV. Blake, leaning against his motorcycle, lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling around his face like a serpent. He thinks he's untouchable, Blake growled. Let's show him what happens when you disrespect us. Back inside, Tyson finished his meal and paid his bill, moving deliberately toward the door. The waitress stepped forward, her voice a desperate whisper. Don't go out there. They're dangerous. Tyson paused, offering her a reassuring nod. I'll be fine, he said, his tone calm but resolute. As he stepped outside, the cold night air greeted him, along with the sight of Blake and his gang encircling his SUV. Their laughter and taunts echoed in the stillness, their presence a wall of menace. Blake stepped forward, his cigarette glowing faintly in the darkness. Leaving so soon, he mocked, his tone dripping with condescension. We thought you might want to stick around, have a little fun with us. Tyson's gaze swept over the gang, his expression unreadable. I'm not here for trouble, he said, his voice low but firm. Let me go, and we can all walk away. Blake smirked, tossing his cigarette to the ground. Oh, you'll walk away, he said, cracking his knuckles. But not until you learn what it means to respect the Shadow Hounds. The gang closed in, their weapons glinting under the faint streetlights. The air grew heavy with anticipation, the calm before the storm. Tyson's posture shifted slightly, his movements deliberate as he prepared himself. The Shadow Hounds had no idea that they were about to face a force of nature. As Mike Tyson stepped into the chilly night air, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The Shadow Hounds, a gang known for their ruthless dominance, had formed a semicircle around his sleek black SUV. Their motorcycles, parked haphazardly, created an almost impenetrable barrier, their chrome surfaces glinting menacingly under the faint glow of the streetlights. Blake, the gang's towering and sinister leader, stood at the center, his arms crossed and his face twisted into a smug grin. Well, look who decided to join us, Blake sneered, his voice oozing with mockery. You think you can just waltz into my town, eat your little meal, and drive off like nothing happened? The gang erupted into cruel laughter, their voices reverberating through the empty parking lot like a pack of wolves preparing for the kill. Tyson's eyes moved deliberately, scanning the faces before him. His expression was calm, unreadable, but there was a subtle shift in his stance, his shoulders squared, his feet planted firmly on the ground. He was ready, even if the gang didn't realize it yet. I don't want any trouble, Tyson said, his voice low and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos surrounding him. Just let me leave, and we'll forget this ever happened. Blake's smirk deepened, his arrogance feeding off the apparent calm of his adversary. Oh, you'll leave, he replied, cracking his knuckles for dramatic effect. But not before we teach you a little respect. The gang moved closer, tightening the circle around Tyson. Weapons began to appear. A chain dangled menacingly in Snake's hand, while another member brandished a crowbar. The metallic clinks and thuds of their weapons, striking the ground, sent chills through the night air. Tyson, however, remained motionless, his gaze steady and focused on Blake. The tension reached its breaking point, and with a curt nod from Blake, the first member lunged forward. The man swung a bat aimed squarely at Tyson's head, but in the blink of an eye, Tyson ducked and delivered a lightning-fast uppercut. The force of the punch sent the attacker sprawling to the ground, the bat clattering uselessly beside him. The gang froze momentarily, shocked by the precision and power of Tyson's strike. Their hesitation was brief, replaced by a surge of rage as two more rushed at him. Tyson moved like a predator in his element. He sidestepped one attacker and deflected a chain strike with his forearm before landing a devastating hook to the ribs of another. The crack of impact echoed through the lot, and the man crumpled, gasping for air. The remaining members hesitated, their confidence wavering as they witnessed their comrades fall one by one. Blake, seething with anger, barked orders to the gang. "Get him! Don't just stand there!" The gang charged in unison, their weapons raised, their faces twisted with fury. But Tyson's years of training and experience transformed the chaos into an opportunity. He ducked, weaved, and countered with a precision that seemed almost otherworldly. Each punch was calculated, each movement efficient. The gang, despite their numbers, found themselves outmatched by a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of combat. Snake, clutching his chain, managed to circle behind Tyson, raising his weapon for a sneak attack. But Tyson, ever aware, turned just in time, catching the chain mid-swing and yanking it free. With one swift motion, he delivered a knockout punch that sent Snake to the ground unconscious. Now, only Blake remained. The gang leader, visibly shaken but refusing to back down, reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. "Let's see how tough you really are," he snarled, his voice trembling slightly as he advanced. Tyson's eyes narrowed, his body tensing in anticipation. The battle wasn't over, but the outcome was already clear. Blake had underestimated the wrong man. Blake tightened his grip on the knife, the blade glinting ominously under the flickering streetlights. His face was a mask of rage and desperation, a stark contrast to Mike Tyson's calm, measured expression. Around them, the parking lot was strewn with the groaning bodies of the Shadow Hounds, their weapons discarded, their arrogance shattered. Blake, now the lone aggressor, took a menacing step forward, the knife held low and ready. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his voice shaking with fury. "You're about to find out who's in charge here." Tyson stood his ground, his piercing gaze locked on Blake. His stance shifted slightly, a subtle but unmistakable sign that he was prepared for what was to come. "Don't do this," Tyson said, his voice calm but laced with warning. "You've already lost. Walk away while you still can." But Blake was beyond reasoning. Driven by pride and a need to reclaim control, he lunged forward, the knife slicing through the air with lethal intent. Time seemed to slow as Tyson sidestepped the attack with precision, his movements fluid and deliberate. In a single seamless motion, he caught Blake's wrist, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground, its threat extinguished. Blake let out a howl of pain as Tyson forced him backward, his arm pinned in a vice-like grip. The gang leader struggled, but Tyson's strength was unyielding. With a swift maneuver, Tyson brought Blake to the ground, pinning him with a knee pressed firmly into his chest. The once dominant leader of the Shadow Hounds was now immobilized, his defiance reduced to a desperate glare. "You've been bullying people for too long," Tyson said, his voice low and commanding. "This ends tonight." His words cut through the tension like a blade, and for the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in Blake's eyes. But the fight wasn't entirely over. Snake, barely conscious, staggered to his feet, clutching a discarded chain. He stumbled toward Tyson, intent on striking him from behind. The crowd of onlookers inside the diner gasped, their collective fear palpable as they pounded on the windows, trying to warn Tyson of the impending danger. Without turning his head, Tyson seemed to sense Snake's approach. In a lightning-fast motion, he spun around, releasing Blake and intercepting the chain mid-swing. The sheer force of Tyson's counterpunch sent Snake crashing to the ground once more, this time for good. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the labored breaths of the fallen gang members. Blake, still pinned to the ground, looked up at Tyson, his arrogance replaced by raw fear. "You don't understand," he stammered. "We run this town. You can't stop us." Tyson leaned closer, his voice a cold whisper. "You don't run anything, not anymore." With that, he released Blake, stepping back as the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night. The police had arrived, their flashing lights casting long shadows across the chaotic scene. Blake's defeat was absolute. As the sheriff's deputies moved in to restrain him, he glanced around at his fallen gang, the weight of his failure sinking in. The reign of the Shadow Hounds had come to a violent, decisive end, and the man responsible for their undoing stood tall amidst the wreckage. Tyson dusted himself off, his breathing steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. The crowd inside the diner erupted into cheers, their gratitude and admiration pouring out in waves. Tyson, ever composed, gave a small nod of acknowledgement before turning toward his SUV. The danger had passed, but the impact of his actions would resonate in the town for a long time to come. As the wail of sirens approached, the defeated gang members lay sprawled across the parking lot, their groans echoing in the night. Blake, the Shadow Hound's arrogant leader, was pinned beneath Mike Tyson's unyielding grip, his chest heaving with labored breaths. The air was heavy with the aftermath of chaos, yet tension still simmered, an unspoken sense that the confrontation was not entirely over. The once dominant gang now resembled a shattered pack, their weapons discarded and their pride in ruins. Suddenly, Blake's lips curled into a defiant sneer, his eyes flicking toward Snake, who was struggling to his feet nearby. A silent signal passed between them, and before Tyson could react, Snake lunged for a discarded baseball bat lying a few feet away. The onlookers inside the diner gasped in unison, their fists pounding on the glass as they tried to warn Tyson of the renewed threat. Snake grasped the bat with trembling hands, his face twisted with pain and desperation. Staggering toward Tyson, he swung the weapon with all his remaining strength, aiming directly for the side of Tyson's head. But Tyson's instincts, honed through years of training and countless fights, kicked in. Without releasing Blake, Tyson shifted his weight and ducked, the bat missing its mark by mere inches. In a fluid motion, Tyson released Blake, pivoted on his heel, and delivered a thunderous punch to Snake's chest. The impact sent Snake flying backward, the bat clattering to the ground as he crumpled into an unconscious heap. The crowd inside the diner erupted into cheers, their voices cutting through the night like a surge of relief. Blake, seeing his last ally fall, scrambled to his feet in a desperate attempt to regain control. His face, now a mask of rage and humiliation, contorted as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small switchblade. The blade gleamed in the faint light, its presence a final, desperate gamble to salvage his shattered dominance. "You think this is over?" Blake growled, his voice trembling with fury. "You've got no idea who you're messing with." Tyson, unfazed by the threat, stepped forward with deliberate calm, his piercing gaze locking onto Blake's. "You don't have to do this," Tyson said, his voice low but firm. "Walk away before it gets worse." But Blake was too consumed by anger to listen. With a guttural roar, he lunged at Tyson, the knife aimed at his chest. Time seemed to slow as Tyson sidestepped the attack with practiced precision, his movements almost impossibly fast. In one swift motion, he caught Blake's wrist, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground, its metallic echo ringing out like a final surrender. Blake cried out in pain as Tyson forced him to his knees, his arm locked in an iron grip. "It's over," Tyson said, his voice steady and commanding. "You've lost." The sound of sirens grew louder, their flashing lights illuminating the parking lot as the sheriff's cruiser skidded to a halt. Deputies spilled out, guns drawn, quickly assessing the scene. Tyson released Blake, stepping back as the officers closed in to restrain the defeated gang leader. Blake, his face pale and twisted with humiliation, was hauled to his feet and handcuffed. His defiance had evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that his reign of terror was over. As the deputies led him away, the townspeople inside the diner cheered louder, their voices filled with gratitude and triumph. Tyson, his work done, stood silently amidst the wreckage, a towering figure of justice and strength. As the sheriff's deputies loaded the battered members of the Shadow Hounds into their cruisers, the parking lot was awash with flashing red and blue lights, casting eerie shadows across the scene. Blake, his arrogance now replaced by humiliation, sat handcuffed in the back seat of a police car, his head hung low. The once dominant leader of the gang had been reduced to a defeated man, his threats and bravado silenced by the raw power and skill of Mike Tyson. Around him, his gang members groaned in pain, their weapons scattered on the asphalt, a stark testament to their failed attempt at dominance. Inside the diner, The townsfolk watched with a mixture of awe and relief. The man who had walked into their quiet, fear-stricken town as a stranger had now become their hero. Applause broke out among the crowd, hesitant at first, but quickly growing into a thunderous ovation. Tyson, standing amidst the wreckage of the gang's reign, remained stoic. His towering frame was still and calm, but his presence radiated a quiet authority that demanded respect. The sheriff approached Tyson, his expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You've done this town a bigger favor than you realize," he said, extending his hand. Tyson shook it firmly, his gaze steady. "Just doing what needed to be done," he replied simply, his voice low but resolute. As the last of the gang members were driven away, their cries of protest fading into the distance, the atmosphere in the parking lot began to shift. The fear and tension that had gripped the town for so long dissipated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of liberation. For the first time in years, the people felt safe. Tyson, however, did not linger to bask in the gratitude of the townsfolk. With a slight nod of acknowledgement to the cheering crowd, he climbed into his black SUV. The engine roared to life, and the headlights cut through the lingering fog as he prepared to leave. As he pulled out of the parking lot, the applause followed him, echoing into the night. The once dominant Shadow Hounds were no more, and Tyson had restored a sense of justice to the town. But for him, it was just another chapter in a journey defined by strength, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to stand against injustice. With the road stretching endlessly ahead, Tyson disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a town forever changed. The story of Mike Tyson's encounter with the Shadow Hounds serves as a powerful reminder of the timeless truths about courage, justice, and the strength to stand against injustice. At its core, the tale highlights the importance of using one's power, not to dominate or intimidate, but to protect and uplift those who cannot defend themselves. Tyson, a man shaped by years of discipline and resilience, becomes a symbol of hope in a town gripped by fear. His ability to remain calm and measured, even in the face of overwhelming aggression, demonstrates the value of self-control and the profound impact it can have in diffusing hostility. The downfall of the Shadow Hounds also underscores a critical message. Arrogance and cruelty will always meet their reckoning. Blake and his gang, who thrived on intimidation and violence, found themselves overpowered by not just physical strength, but the moral clarity of a man unwilling to tolerate injustice. Their defeat is a testament to the idea that no amount of bravado or numbers can stand against someone driven by purpose and integrity. For the townsfolk, Tyson's actions were more than just a moment of physical triumph. They were a beacon of change. His bravery inspired them to reclaim their voice and confidence, proving that even the darkest situations can be overcome when courage and justice prevail. Ultimately, the story is a call to action for all who hear it, to stand firm in the face of adversity, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to remember that true strength lies not in the power to harm, but in the ability to choose restraint and justice. Mike Tyson's journey in this tale is a poignant reminder that even in the quietest acts of heroism, the ripple effects can transform lives and restore hope.